Nice to see you, nice. Yeah, long time. Well, not that long, a couple of months. So recently I've been doing something called book clubs where I study with a small group of people, books, different spiritual books. And with one group I'm just about to start looking at Wake Up and Roar, which is talks of Papajis, transcribed talks of Papajis. And I like to read before I go to bed, and I decided to start reading his biography, and I haven't got very far. It's like 3 volumes, but I was just really touched by his experience, his first experience in childhood of no self, and just thought I would share it with you, and maybe some talking from me will come afterwards. We never know. When I do these talks, I'm only excited to do them if I spontaneously talk. So it's not planned or it's not thought about, it's just a spontaneous expression. But it's not guaranteed. So after I've read this, it might not be much that comes out. Okay. So when I think he was maybe like 9 or 10 years old, I'll just give you a quick brief history of what came about. He went into this sudden state of bliss and emptiness, and he couldn't move and he couldn't speak and he couldn't do anything. And that went on, I think, for 3 days. And then after 3 days, he came out of it, and it was completely blissful and joyful and free. And so, yeah, this is his description of it. I think it was like his description of it like a month or so later. What was the effect of this experience in your life? Papaji, first of all, I wouldn't call it an experience, because to have an experience there needs to be an experiencer and something that is experienced. Neither was present. Something was pulling me inside, and that thing that pulled me had no form. I didn't know what it was, but you're asking about the effect. That is more easy to describe. From that moment till now, I've always been happy. The happiness I felt inside when I was paralyzed didn't leave me when my body functions returned to normal. That inside happiness stayed, but I still didn't know what it was. So he was only 10, and although his parents were Hindus, they didn't have any spiritual knowledge to help him or tell him what it was. And then a few years later, somebody else asked him about it in his satsangs, and he said, and they asked him to describe what happened. He said, I didn't see anything. I didn't perceive anything at all, so how can I possibly describe it? The only phase that comes near to describing what I was feeling is uncensored happiness. Whenever I'm asked about what happened that day, I plunge back into that place of happiness, a place that is completely beyond time. I can't describe it, but the feeling is still there. Even though it happened many decades ago, I can't call it nothingness and I can't call it somethingness. I was very conscious, but of what I can't say. Sometimes I call it emptiness, but that is not satisfactory. It doesn't convey the joy and the unalloyed happiness of the state. And then they ask, why did you become such an ardent devotee of Lord Krishna after this deep experience of self? So he's like 10 years old. I already told you it's not an experience of any kind because there was no experiencer. As for it being an experience of self, at the time I did not even know what that meant. My mother was a devotee of Krishna, as are millions of other people all over India. I absorbed the stories and traditions of Krishna Bhakti from my mother until they became part of my life as well. I fell in love with his form because to me, he was such a beautiful person. I was very innocent at the time, so I didn't have the usual relationship with him. Most Krishna Bhaktis treat him as a great being, as God himself, and they try to love him as a devotee loves God. God is love itself. He doesn't need love from any form. In the beginning, I wasn't really his devotee. I was just his friend. I loved him as a friend. So he came and played with me in that form. I didn't treat him as a god. I just laughed and played with him in much the same way that I would do with any other boy my own age. Yeah, I think it's super beautiful. It's there's a similarity to Ramana Maharshi, as in it happened spontaneously, and when he was a child, Ramana Maharshi, I believe, was 16 and had a near-death experience, whereas it just happened without any prior experience. But one thing that can be said is that he was already very spiritual and attracted to spirituality as a young child, if you read his biography. But it's so sweet, his description of it. And I suppose what touches me is that it's not about the learnt and learning. So to him, he had no knowledge of this. He didn't learn something. Some people might say it's from previous life's learning, but in a way, it's an absence. It's like he said, like a pulling back inside, but not somebody's inside. It's like pulling back to a stillness that's always been there, that doesn't need anything. And it's here, present in all things, and it's not something that the mind works out. Like he, as Papaji, at 10 years old, didn't sit and work out. He didn't have any of those ideas or information. It happened, and there was no resistance to it. And then once that shifts happen, once the awakenings happen, it's like it sits there in the background, like cleaning everything. To me, I would say it's like an emptiness that's here, that's cleaning all experience, that's accessible all the time. It's not a state which comes and goes, it's here in everything. Whereas most people, though, they're so focused on form and getting and themselves that it's covered. And I can understand the frustration of these talks. Like, some part of me wants to make it not a thing, not something tangible like this that's filled with love and happiness, because it sets up all types of expectations, and the person then seeks for that or feels discouraged, like, why don't I get it? But that's also part of the delusions of the mind. It's not the responsibility of the speaker to try to avoid certain things, to pacify the student. I mean, there is that to an extent in certain situations, but in the end, any jealousy or frustration or feeling left out has to go inward. Like, the solution to it isn't by stopping the speaker speak about these dissolving into self and the love and the bliss of it. It's the going in, going in, going in. Like, it's not true that you are left out. It's not true that you haven't got it or you can't access it. This is all ideas of the mind. It's not your reality. Your reality is this oneness. It's in all things, and it's the only freedom. You won't find the freedom in settling yourself down, in you becoming something. Like Papaji at 10 years old, I'm sure didn't have great psychology. I remember like one part where he said when people lied to him, like as a child, he beat them up. And described this violence that he would have, and he didn't have any self-reflection on it. It was just like, yeah, they lie, they get beaten up, that's the way it is. I don't know what his views is as an 80-year-old man when this was written, but like as a child, like when that experience happened, that was his perspective on things. Like, it's not about having the perfect psychology or the perfect conditions. It's always stories. It's coming back to what's actually happening. There's all these illusions that are springing up from the mind and the feelings and the senses, and none of that is true. That isn't your truth. The truth is this love, this bliss of who you are, this oneness of who you are, which is here, beaming from the heart in every experience. And I know me putting it into words makes it something, but don't let that become a something for you. That's me trying my best to express like my heart's joy or song. And maybe in that there's a resonance. Like when I read Papaji's words about this, it's like I just like dove back into that oneness. And this is where I say like there needs to be some form of identification, because also in this he says, when the functioning of the body came back, for 3 days he was rendered incapable of doing anything. And that's to me when you're in deep samadhi. And you can't function when you're in deep samadhi. And deep samadhi is like a oneness experience. It's like there is absolutely no person, no world, no anything. There needs to be some form of identification with a functioning body in order to function through life. And that appearance of a character can be more or less throughout the day, dependent on what's needed. Yeah. And then somebody speaks about it, and my heart, when I read it, my heart flutters. My heart is so joyful to hear another person speaking about it. And I think that this is always been my main way of expressing this. It's just speaking from the heart, spontaneously speaking. And then if somebody can hear it, even if it's just one person out of 1,000 views, that is such joy. It's such joy when I hear somebody else describe it. Yeah. And that is all there is. That is prior to birth, it's here in sleep, in deep sleep, it's here after death. That is what this life is made up of. That is all that's ever needed. Anything you think that is needed, anything that you think you can't live without or you can't have, is illusion. All your sensory perception is illusion. The idea that you're looking at me, the idea that you're sitting on a seat, it's all illusory, it's not true. And the only thing that is true is your heart, which is the beingness. That is the truth. And it's here, here, here. It's singing in everything. It's singing in this moment. It's singing in the no place. The mind looks in places, the mind looks in things. Yeah, maybe that is all today. Thank you. Wishing you everything, every goddamn thing. Not just one thing or 2 things or 3, but everything.